Everyone knows that the level of civil discourse is about as low as it's been in the last 50 years at least. And I don't think that's only because people are using unpersuasive arguments. I think it's also because we are failing to dialogue with people in a way that will help the other person to feel less defensive. People are automatically defensive when they're discussing an issue with someone that they disagree with. And if we want to have a chance of actually changing that person's mind, then we need to help bring those walls down so they don't feel defensive, so that they can actually hear us. These 4 practical dialogue tips are specifically designed to do that. So all of the little things that we're doing here, the way that we ask questions, taking the time to listen well, the overall effect of these things when executed well is to lower their shields, to change their emotional posture from being defensive to receptive. While my examples will be focused on the abortion debate, these same tips can be used to improve any conversation you have, even with your spouse or children. Tip number 1, ask lots of clarification questions. After having had around 1,000 conversations with pro-choice people, I am amazed at how many questions I still need to ask them if I want a shot at understanding them. As Steve Wagner at Justice for All says, you should ask clarification questions because you don't actually know what they think, intend, or feel. Think of yourself as being in information gathering mode or detective mode. You should be genuinely curious about what the person thinks. The primary reason you should do this is because it's a truly loving thing to show interest in a person's ideas, especially when they contradict your own. It will also help you avoid strawmanning the person. In other words, countering with an argument that doesn't actually address their real view, but a dumber version of it instead. This is very annoying, and pro-life and pro-choice people do this to each other all the time. So ask lots of clarification questions, like, you called yourself pro-choice. Can you tell me what that means to you? I've heard a lot of different definitions of that label. Or, do you believe abortion should be legal through all 9 months or something less than that? Or, do you believe there are any reasons a woman may choose to have an abortion that should not be legal? For example, should it be legal to abort a girl simply because she's a girl? Pro tip, don't ask all of these questions back to back. That will make them feel defensive, like you're an interrogator trying to catch them making a mistake. Instead, start your conversation with a few clarifying questions, then respond to those with some of your thoughts, and then ask another question. Tip number 2, listen to understand. A lot of people think that listening is just not interrupting, but I want to tell you that it's more than that. It means to turn off your inner monologue. Stop thinking about the next argument you want to make and truly listen to what they have to say. I learned this lesson the hard way several years ago when my wife had a couple of very important conversations with me. You see, I had built up this dumb husband habit where I would get home from work and the kids would want to play, but I would want to talk to my wife first. And, if she's frazzled, try to de-stress her and just kind of hang out with her for a while. And so often, like, she might be in the kitchen and she's maybe working on dinner and we're talking to each other about our days, right? But I built up this dumb husband habit where sometimes she would be telling me about her day and I would be browsing Facebook statuses on my phone. Okay, even though you are somewhere else right now, I can feel your judgment against me right now. Okay, so just understand, this was so innocent. I thought I was listening, right? Because I could tell that she was, talking. And I could kind of follow the themes of what she was talking. I was basically overestimating my ability to multitask. It turns out that I actually couldn't really track with what she was saying, while at the same time doing something as mindless as browsing Facebook statuses. And that was very frustrating for her, as it should have been. That was not a very good way to love my wife. My point is, it's obvious to basically everyone watching this right now that I should not have been doing that, and you're very judgy right now about that. And yet, probably every single one of us, if we're having a philosophical conversation with someone about a complicated topic like abortion, it's common for us to be in our own head thinking about our next move. What is the next argument that I want to make? What is the next question that I want to ask? Like, we're kind of planning our next chess move. And that doesn't make sense to me. If we can't do something as mindless as browsing Facebook statuses, then we probably can't be thinking about complicated philosophical things while someone's talking and really be listening to them. Show the pro-choice person you're talking to that you respect them by turning off your inner monologue and truly listening to them. Tip number 3, find genuine common ground when possible. Pro-life and pro-choice people often think of themselves as polar opposites, but I can find common ground with virtually every pro-choice person I talk to. The pro-choice person is expecting to talk to an unreasonable, closed-minded pro-life person, so that actually gives you an advantage. You get to play good cop, bad cop with a caricature of the pro-life movement that's in their head. They're going to be genuinely intrigued by you because you're so different from the stereotypical pro-life activist. Some regular points of common ground are, we usually agree that abortion should happen less often. We usually agree that abortion hurts women, at least sometimes. We usually agree that some abortions are so wrong that they should be illegal, like elective late-term abortions and sex-selective abortions. That's a lot of common ground, and our job is to point it out when it happens, either verbally or through body language. This will greatly improve your conversation because it'll show that you have some things in common, which makes it seem more possible to have a rational discussion about the things that you disagree on. If you're not in the habit of pointing out, either verbally or through body language, every area of common ground you have with the person you're talking to, you will be amazed at how dramatically this will change the tone of your future conversations. And finally, tip number 4, don't make arguments with question marks. This tip represents a huge change we made to our training material 5 years ago. We now think differently about certain kinds of questions than we did for most of our careers and the way we usually hear Christian apologists teach people to use questions. We think you should almost never use a question to make an argument. Use questions to seek clarification, and do that a lot. But when it's time to make an argument, use a statement instead. I'm not just talking about obnoxious leading questions like, when did you stop beating your wife? Okay, obviously you shouldn't ask those. I'm saying pretty much any argument that is made with a question mark will be more persuasive if it's made with a period instead. Those arguments often have the words shouldn't or wouldn't in them. For example, well, it seems like to have the Big Bang, you'd need to have a big banger, wouldn't you? If you believe in human rights and if the unborn are human, then shouldn't they have human rights too? I think the pro-choice person often gets a subtext in the argument from the pro-lifer that feels like, clearly my conclusion follows from my premises, and I'm asking you to state your agreement because only a stupid person would disagree. Again, that's not always what the pro-life person intends, but it can come across that way. Arguments with question marks are extremely rhetorically effective in a formal debate context. They put you in an I've got the high ground position, which is exactly why you shouldn't do that in a dialogue. Because in a dialogue, that kind of powerful rhetorical move actually works against you if your goal is convincing the other person they should change their mind. Question marks are powerful, and the way they impact a person's psyche will have an impact on the conversation. When I start making arguments against abortion, at the beginning of my conversation, I'm operating under the assumption that their shields are up, that they have the kind of emotional posture where they feel defensive about their view and they're ready to fight for their view and against anything I'm going to say, which makes them less receptive to the force of my arguments. Instead of thinking about whether or not my argument defeats one of their arguments, they're focused on preventing my argument from defeating their argument. Because I want them to actually change their mind, I don't want to just win the argument, I have to be focused not just on having my ideas prevail at the idea level. I've got to be thinking, how do I help them to feel the kind of emotional safety in the conversation that they would have if they were discussing this issue with a friend, where they would actually consider what I'm saying? We aren't recommending people use arguments with question marks anymore unless they've built a lot of rapport with people. Here's why. It often makes the person feel like he's being Socratized, and people don't like that. It's been really interesting to have salespeople and family therapists listen to this lesson and tell me that they've been learning the same thing in their own fields, that they've been learning that leading questions annoy people at best and shut them down at worst. We have a new attitude about our conversations. Our attitude is to try to have the worst poker strategy ever, just trying to put all of our cards face up on the table. So if I'm talking to a pro-choice person and they say that they think abortion should be legal because there are a lot of people who are too poor to care for a child, then I'm going to put my cards face up on the table and say, okay, I agree with you. Some women are too poor to care for a child. In fact, there are some people that are in deep poverty. They are barely living paycheck to paycheck. And the idea of an unplanned pregnancy would really feel like a crisis to them. I get that. But here's the thing that's going on for me. I've got this view that you might think is kind of weird. I believe that a human zygote is equally valuable as a human toddler. I think that there are some differences between those two things. I just don't think any of those differences are morally relevant. I think they both have an equal right to life because they are the same kind of thing. They are a valuable human being. So when you mentioned someone being too poor to care for your child, I kind of had two thoughts simultaneously. One was I felt sad and empathetic for people who are in poverty. I don't want them to be in poverty. And we could have a whole conversation about what our government and our culture could do to help decrease poverty. And that would be a worthwhile conversation. The other thing that I thought was, well, would that be a good reason to kill a toddler? And I don't think it would be. And so because I think that a human zygote and a human toddler are equal, and when it comes to value, I'm not instantly pro-choice as soon as you say poverty, because I don't think that we should kill people to solve a budget problem. So come back at me. Help me understand. What do you think is wrong with my argument? Notice at this point, I have put my cards face up on the table. I have described my logic, and then I'm inviting them to tell me what they think is wrong with it. And they will probably say, oh, I don't think that the unborn, like a human zygote, for example, is a valuable human being. And great, then we can talk about that. We are now talking about one of the two very important disagreements between pro-life and pro-choice people. The other one being bodily autonomy, whether bodily autonomy, a woman's right to her own body, would trump the rights of the child, even if it is a person. But notice I've gotten this conversation on track with this person in a way that does not make them feel defensive. It's very transparent. It's very authentic. It's very like, here, let me just tell you what's going on for me. Help me understand why I'm wrong. And we have been finding test after test after test that works better with people, especially young people now, than it does to ask them questions that might make them feel like we're leading them to a conclusion that they don't want to end up with. Let me give you another example of this way of putting cards face up on the table. My brother and I once had a series of 15 meetings with the same LDS missionaries in my living room. Before and after every one of these meetings, my brother and I would brief or debrief, talk about how that went, try to create a strategy for our next meeting, and so on and so forth. And we had a lot of very interesting conversations with those young men. But I remember three back-to-back meetings, we were discussing the Trinity. You see, members of the Church of Latter-day Saints don't believe in the Trinity in the same way that Catholics and Protestants do. And so we had these three meetings kind of debating whose view of the Trinity made the more sense, given certain biblical verses, given philosophy, etc. And the first couple of meetings weren't very productive. It was kind of everyone was throwing proof texts at each other, which is kind of the way Christians often debate anyway. We're throwing proof texts at each other, and they weren't really responding to our proof text. They were just responding to our verses with their own favorite verses. And so I had this idea that I brought up to Tim before our second meeting, and that he ended up using kind of at the end of the second meeting to try to set up the third one. And that idea was to change the tone of the conversation to one that felt very even to them, to one where we would actually give them an advantage and try to set things up more in a David and Goliath style. And so at the end of the second meeting, Tim basically said, look, I'm not ready to give up on discussing the Trinity with you. Let's do one more attempt. Come back in a couple of weeks. We'll continue this discussion about the Trinity, but let's do it a different way. Let's do this David and Goliath style. He said, you bring your two strongest verses about, your view of the Trinity or not the Trinity. I'll bring my two strongest verses, and we'll kind of let them duke it out and see maybe if that helps us figure out who has the best view. And Tim said, here's the thing. I'm going to give you my two verses right now. Pull out a pencil. And one of them whipped out a little notebook, a pocket-sized notebook and a pencil so fast. I'd never seen it before. I never knew that he had it on him. But he whips this thing out, and Tim starts explaining not just the references, but in syllogism form, how he's going to make his argument for the Trinity. And this guy is like writing down so fast, I felt like I could see smoke coming up from his pencil. And I'm looking at them, and they're all sitting literally at the edge of my couch. They were paying attention to every single word coming out of my brother's mouth. Why? Because this is not how people debate topics. Trust me, Trump and Biden did not hang out in the green room before the debate and kind of talk about notes and kind of what their best arguments were going to be. Like, that's just not what people do. But this is not a debate. This is a dialogue. We're all on the same team. We're all trying to find truth together. There's no winners, there's no losers, there's no audience. Like, we're just trying to find truth. And so it's fine. If we're going to be open-minded and intellectually virtuous, I have no problem with giving them an advantage in the dialogue by saying, like, here's a bunch of the thoughts that I have. Go do your homework. Go think about it and come back to us. In this case, we say, come back with your 2 verses and how you want to respond to the 2 verses that we are going to bring up next time. And let's have that conversation. And you know what? The next meeting was a lot more productive. And we didn't mind the fact that we sort of gave them an advantage, if you will, by kind of giving them our notes. Here's where we're going to go next time. Now you go prepare and come back. There was another time we did an outreach at Portland Community College. We set up this table and we were inviting people to come talk to us. And I ended up talking to this short girl named Ariel, or I'm calling her Ariel for the sake of the story. It's not a real name. And I'm sitting on the table because I'm fairly tall and she's short. And so I'm trying to find a way to get our eye lines level. I just don't like it when tall guys kind of lord their height over short women. It's really obnoxious. And so I'm sitting on the table and just I'm being relaxed and I'm chill. She is way pro-choice, by the way. I'm not really optimistic about changing her mind in that day, but we're having this conversation. I'm asking her some clarification questions. I'm occasionally making a counter argument. And then Gabriel shows up, not the angel. Something else. I'll never forget Gabriel. Gabriel is the most obnoxious pro-life person I have ever spent time with on a college campus. Let me describe him for you. Gabriel is really tall. He's got to be 6'5" or something. He has got this really short, military style haircut, and he's got a full-length black leather trench coat, like Neo from The Matrix, which I was like, I don't think that's a fashion thing anymore, and it's not. And he had one look on his face the entire time. He was there for hours. And he had one look on his face that said, I am the smartest individual within 100 yards of this place. And so I am here to play with you, mouse, for my own personal amusement. That was the look that he had on his face. And I'm talking to Ariel when he shows up and says, oh, cool, there's this pro-life thing here. I'll have an opportunity to best some pro-choice people, some stupid pro-choice students. And so he walks up and he gets directly across the table from Ariel in fight mode. And he gives her this look, this condescending look, and basically says, do you believe this? And I don't remember what the end of the sentence was, but the subtext was this stupid pro-choice thing that people believe. And then he asked her another one. And also, do you believe this other stupid pro-choice belief? And I looked at Ariel and I could see her shut down. And I said, pause. Let's have a discussion. Let's have a meta discussion. Let's have a discussion about the discussion. Okay, and I looked at Ariel and I said, Ariel, we're 2 pro-life guys. Which one of us is more likely to change your mind? And she instantly said, you. And I said, why? I'm very interested in persuasion. Tell me, why am I more likely to change your mind? And she said 2 things. She said, well, I like your body language. I was sitting on the table. I was relaxed. This guy was directly across from her in fight mode. And then she said, and I like the kinds of questions you ask. Because I had only been asking clarification questions. And then when it was time to make an argument, I just made an argument. Whereas Gabriel was asking these obnoxious leading questions. And to be fair, most pro-life people are not as obnoxious as Gabriel. But making an argument and ending it with a question mark can still have that same effect of shutting people down. Again, if you are very skilled and have established a lot of trust and rapport with someone, you may be able to pull off an argument with a question mark without hurting the person's chance to changing their mind. I still do it occasionally, but I do it far less than I used to. And if it's the first time you've ever talked to someone, I would recommend that you err on the side of caution here and just place your cards on the table so as to avoid accidentally making them feel led by arguments that have question marks at the end of them. If you'd like to learn more of our practical dialogue tips, as well as the pro-life arguments we found to change the most minds, we'd encourage you to purchase our online course, Equipped for Life, a fresh approach to conversations about abortion. It's a 5-hour course that walks you through all of the key components of the abortion debate, and we're continuing to add to those lessons to this day. If you use the coupon code Anglicans during checkout before the end of January, you will be given 25% off any permanent membership to the course. You can learn more about it at equippedcourse.com, and you can read our articles and subscribe to our podcasts at equalrightsinstitute.com. If in your future dialogues you ask lots of clarifying questions, listen to understand, find genuine common ground when possible, and avoid making arguments with question marks, you will have far more productive and persuasive conversations. And that is critically important for pro-life advocates to do, because the unborn are relying on our ability to persuade a large segment of our culture that they should have an equal right to life. If we do that, we can make abortion unthinkable and illegal. Thank you very much.